Welcome to the Happy Farmer Practice Guide. Please have your score ready to follow along as we work through all the details of the piece before we take out our violins to practice it. Step one is we want to observe, what does this title mean? The Happy Farmer. We have the connotation of happy and, of course, farmer. Farmer evokes the countryside and all the joys of beautiful nature. We can also see this in the metronome indication, allegro giocoso. Allegro meaning lively, fast, and giocoso meaning playful, jovial, joyous. These terms and the title are in stark contrast to the work's composer, Robert Schumann's own life. Robert Schumann was a German composer, pianist, and music critic. He was born in 1810 and died in 1856. Yes, indeed, he did have a short and troubled life, from his own self-inflicted injury to his hands when he was trying to become a better performer of the piano, to severe mental illness that plagued him his entire life. In spite of this, Schumann was able to mentor the young Brahms alongside his virtuoso partner of the piano and wife, Clara Schumann. Even to this day, we recognize Schumann as one of the most important figures of European music, both as a composer and a theorist and critic behind the meaning of music. Schumann evokes his metronome indication of allegro giocoso through his use of up-bow pickups, hooked bowings, slurs, accents, skips, and leaps throughout the piece. We really want to observe that every phrase starts with an up bow pickup. This is critical to getting that kind of farmer feel, so to speak. We also want to observe when there is a staccato dot and when there is not a staccato dot. Notice that every single pickup does not have the staccato dot. So we want to make sure our eighth note pickups are full value, yet leading us in to the start of the phrase. Before we dive in more to the articulations and rhythms of the piece, let us observe our key signature. We can see from the beginning of the score that we have one sharp. One sharp will either indicate G major or E minor. We can make an educated guess about the true key by observing if there are any accidentals, the first and last note of the piece as well. We can see that the very first note of this piece is D. The very last note of this piece is indeed G. If we take a look through and scan, we notice there are absolutely no accidentals. If we were in a minor key, in this case E minor, we would have to have C sharp and D sharp at some point. We don't have that at all. So we are pretty sure G major. We also want to discover what in the world this C is all about. This C represents common time. Yes, so common meaning the most frequently used or seen. Common time is represented by 4/4 in numerals. So we know that either C or 4/4 are indeed the common time. They're used pretty much interchangeably throughout music. What we really need to know is that there are 4 beats per measure and that a quarter note equals 1 beat. Measures 1, 5, 11, and 17 are tricky for a couple of reasons. First of all, they have a dotted quarter note hooked into a staccato eighth note. This will prove tricky for counting and for our bow. Let's focus on the rhythm problem first. Within common time, or 4/4, as we know, there are 4 beats per measure. We can also think of this as 4 quarter notes. We want to be able to divide the big beats. The simplest way that we have observed lately is through eighth notes. We know that eighth notes on their own are worth half of a beat. So Inside of the quarter note are 2 eighth notes. Half plus half is 1. When we see eighth notes by themselves, they have their flag. When they come together, we beam them so that it's easier to recognize them as taking up 2 equal halves of 1 beat. Within 1 full measure of 4/4, we will have 8 eighth notes. The counting is as follows. We have the big beats here of 1, 2, 3, 4. In between all of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have half of the beat inside. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It doesn't matter really that these are quote unquote faster. It is all relevant upon our tempo. I'm going to just choose a moderate tempo. So for example, I'm going to tap quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. We just split that big pulse into 2 equal halves so that we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The tricky bit about these measures are the fact that we have a dotted quarter hooked into an eighth note. Let's observe what that means. A dotted quarter note and an eighth note, and then again another dotted quarter note with an eighth note, and of course a slur into a staccato eighth note. Now, we need to also factor in what in the world the placement of a dot means. When a dot is underneath the note head or on top of the note head, that is staccato. Staccato means separated. More on that later. A separated bow. When a dot is on the side of the note head, that adds length to how long that note is. The dot on the side of the note head is equal to half of that note's value. So in this case, we have a quarter note, which is equal to 1. Half of 1 is, of course, half. Meaning a dotted quarter note is equal to 1.5 beats, or 3 eighth notes. We can see that here. A quarter note takes up 1 and. We need another eighth note here, and so we box them together like this. That first dotted quarter is then counted as 1 and 2. The eighth note that it is hooked into is on the and of 2. We then can observe that this quarter note, dotted quarter note, starts on beat 3. We need 3 and for the quarter note, and then another eighth note. This is 3 and 4. This guy is on the and of 4. So this rhythm is then as so. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. There are several excellent ways to practice this hooked bowing. First, I'd recommend doing this pattern on an open string. For example, on the D string, we can think 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That brings brings us into this element of the staccato eighth note. In order to achieve a good staccato, we have to stop the bow. For example, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Another great step is to practice the hooked bowing by crossing strings. For example, we would do D, A, D, which we will see in the Happy Farmer. To make this a little bit more difficult, you can do your finger patterns with hooked bowing and your scales with hooked bowing. Here's a D major finger pattern. We can also try a D major 1 octave scale. Next, you can practice the left hand part alone. G, B, D, G. And then put it together. Now observe that measures 9 and 15 have in fact the same rhythm, yet different articulation. In measure 9, for example, we have an accent on the downbeat, but notice that the eighth note has no staccato dot, nor does the last eighth note of the bar. We really want to observe this difference. The first half of the measure has an accent on the front end of the beat, and a complete legato slur. 1 and 2 and... Then we have a double up bow as well. Make sure to not be separated here. Altogether, that measure is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Going into the next bar. Measure 15 is exactly the same. The overall message is do not put a staccato dot where it doesn't belong. Really exaggerate the difference between the articulations here to be the most exciting in your playing and performing. We also want to use the same mentality regarding the dynamic markings. The piece starts forte, loud and strong. It continues all the way until the pickup into measure 9, where we drop down a little bit to mezzo forte, which is a moderate or medium dynamic. That goes until the pickup into bar 11, where we go back to forte. The pickup to measure 15 is again mezzo forte, and right into measure 17, we have a forte pickup all the way through to the end. We'll also want to observe where we have accents. We have accents again in measure 10, measure 16. These are on eighth notes, and we don't want them to really obstruct our rhythm. So make sure it is right at the front of the note and you keep going through as necessary. And last but certainly not least, please observe the fingering, particularly an open string versus a fourth finger. Last but certainly not least, please make sure to check the fingering, particularly when it comes to open versus fourth finger. It's a good idea to stay on one string for as long as possible. A reason to use the open string is to check what notes follow it. If there's an open string, for example, if you take a look in the second full bar of the piece, we have C, E, G. E is followed by the G on the E string. It's a good idea to use the open E string here. A good example for using the fourth finger occurs in measure 10, where we have C, B, A, G, A. Here, we want to use our third finger for the G, and instead of string crossing to the open A, just use your fourth finger. Make sure that when you go to start this piece to not get stuck at the lower end of your bow. This will not make your pickup very easy to do. Try and start a little bit above the middle.